In this tutorial, we're going to use Illustrator CC 2020 to go through some of the image trace functions. It's probably one of my favorite things to do in Illustrator. It's a quick way to convert some of those raster images. Remember, raster is built on pixels, and turn them into vectors, which are built on mathematical formulas. So for this one, let's go ahead and start with our image trace. So you should go into our image trace, and you're going to find the cute little Pokemon. And let's do a file open for that silhouette.png. Let's do a file save as. Let's change it to first initial last name underscore silhouette. Whoa. I'm going to go ahead and put it in my image trace folder, and I'm going to go ahead and keep that as an Illustrator file and say save. So you can see right now my image is pretty big. I want to make sure that my artboard is about the same size. So let's go to Object and Artboards. And let's come down here to fit to artwork bounds. So now we're about the same size. Now we're going to go over here to our properties panel. Our image is selected. We've got our lines here. Let's go to our properties panel and hit image trace. And for this image trace, we're going to go ahead and say silhouette. Now it's going to go ahead and turn that all black. Let's go ahead and fine tune that just a little bit. So it's going to hit that checklist right next to the word preset. It's going to open up that image trace panel. That allows us to fine tune some of those items. So let's go ahead. If you look at advanced, you can go ahead and change the paths. You can change corners. Depends on what you really want to show. For this one, all I want is really the outline, so I'm happy with it. But I will go ahead and take a peek and show you what happens when we play with those paths. Take them down a little bit lower. Maybe you want to grab some of the additional. I should start to change this just a little bit. It's not changing it. That's fun. Take that threshold down a little bit. There we go. So if we change with the threshold, we change the paths, we change the corners, it kind of changes what we're going to go ahead and capture. See how when I change that path more up to high, we got kind of more detail coming in his hands. So it really depends on what type of silhouette you want. So when you're happy with what you've got, I'm going to go ahead and say close the image panel and say expand. It's going to go ahead and convert that into our outlines. So now that we have our image is a vector file. So it's very, very simple to use that one. So let's go ahead and do a file save. And then you're going to go ahead and do your on your own for that one as well. So now let's see, maybe you want to do you want to trace some kind of sketched art. So I've got some sketched art here, some flowers. I'm going to do Control Plus, going to zoom up a little bit. Now you're going to notice my sketched art's got a little bit of garbage on the side. I'm not going to worry about it at this point. We can easily take that out. Let's do a file, save as. Let's do a first initial last name underscore sketched trace. And put it in my trace folder, and Adobe Illustrator is fine, and say save. So let's go ahead and say OK. Let's make sure we grab our selection tool, make sure we select our artwork. And we're going to go over here to our properties panel, to our image trace. We want to come down here to sketched art. And it's going to go ahead and do its thing. So it didn't really grab everything I wanted to grab, so I'm going to go ahead and play with a little more. So I'm going to grab that trace panel. And in that trace panel, I'm going to go ahead and change a few of the settings. So I'm going to change that threshold to be about 215. I'm going to change that paths. It's going to redo each time to 20%. And change the corners to 20%. I'm going to grab that noise. I'm going to go ahead and take it up to 80. I want fills to be checked. I want snap curves to line to be checked. I'm going to unclick that ignore white. So you can kind of see how much detail you're going to go ahead and keep or lose depending on the trace. You can always go back in and clean up some of these lines later. Just kind of, this is your initial pass. So if you put in a whole bunch of paths, let's see what happens. When you add a whole bunch of paths, we're going to add a whole bunch more details. We're going to start picking up more of those little bitty things that we may or may not want. I don't really want all that kind of graphite look. So I'm going to go ahead and take my pass back down. So you can take it to whatever you like. When you're happy with it, go ahead and close that trace panel, hit expand. It's going to go ahead and change that to outlines. Let's go ahead and while it's selected, hit ungroup. I'm then going to grab my selection tool and start grabbing around some of those lines that I know I want to get rid of. So I know I don't want all this extra on the edges. So I can go ahead and get rid of some of those. So anything that you want to go ahead and clean up, it's very easy to change and create a very simple sketch. Maybe you just then want to grab certain paths. You can just grab certain paths and create something individual. You can simplify some of these. We can do a undo and put that back up there. I can do a go ahead and select that. I'm going to select the whole thing. Let's go ahead and group it again. I can go up to an object, come down here to paths, and tell it to simplify some of those paths. Make it a little bit easier so you can kind of see what happens when you do this. Either makes them have more or fewer or more anchor points. So you can kind of see what's happening there. So it's up to you. And that is how you create a object trace from a very simple sketch. All right, let's go ahead and save that one and close it down. The next one we're going to do is do a recolored trace. So we're going to go ahead and make this horse into a horse poster. So I've got my horse for image trace. Let's do a file and save as. And I'm going through this really quickly because I've already sat here for an hour or so playing with all the different types of paths and corners and the different options. So it's totally up to you as to what you're going to do with it. I'm going to go with first initial last name underscore horse for image trace, or I'm just going to do horse trace, put it in my folder and say save. Now let's go ahead and my obvious is a little bit bigger. This is set to about 8.5 by 11. You don't necessarily have to do it that big because you are making a vector, but I like to start with more details than fewer because I'm weird that way. Now let's do an object. Let's come down here to artboards and let's go ahead and fit artwork to bounds. Now for this one, we're going to do something a little bit different because we actually want to recolor it just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and do my selection tool, select it. Let's go to my image trace. I'm going to get I want to go ahead and do the low fidelity photo. It's fine if you get this message. Now it's going to go ahead and start tracing that for us. And because it's a pretty big image, it's got quite a bit of details, it's going to take just a little bit for it to do that. So once we get it through, we're going to change it to the initial trace. And then what we're going to do is play with some of the colors. So if you wanted to, you could go and resize this image to begin with before you played with it. You could change it to a raster image. There's a few different ways to make this go a little bit faster. I don't remember it taking quite this long last time, but that's okay. All right, so now I'm going to do a Control Plus, and I can see that I have now changed those pixels into vectors. So now I want to go ahead and add a little bit of color to my swatch library. So I'm going to go to Window, come down here to Swatches. I'm going to go to the bottom of my swatch library, hit the books. I want art history and Russian art poster. I'm going to go ahead and just choose one of those to put into my swatches. I kind of chose the fourth one down. Now I'm going to go ahead into my image trace panel, and instead of, I want to go ahead and recolor this. So let's go ahead in our properties panel for the palette. We're going to go ahead and choose the Russian poster art. And for colors, so I'm going to say, okay, what's in those colors for Russian poster art? I'm just going to think for a minute first. Once it goes into Russian poster art, you're going to go ahead and choose whichever color group you like. I kind of chose the red, blue, black, and white, but there's a lot of different options in there. This is where starting with a slightly smaller image works in your favor. So with this, you can kind of create fun pop art. You can create some really different types of images, create something a little bit special. And it's one of the fun things I like to do with. So I'm going to go ahead with these colors and choose that fourth one down. So I'm not crazy about the mint and chocolate kind of colors we've got going on. And I would pause this, but my recording has been kind of wonky, so I don't want to mess with not being able to pick it back up again. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and leave everything else the way it is. I'm going to leave paths at 50. I'm going to leave corners at 50s. I'm going to take that noise up to 50 and play with that a little bit. Kind of add a little bit more. And once I'm happy with it, I will go ahead, you can keep playing with this forever. Try playing with all those different elements. So kind of the noise changed a little bit. So let's go ahead now. I'm going to close my image trace. I'm going to close my swatches and come over here and say expand. It's going to go ahead and convert that all into paths. So if I were to do like a view and an outline, I could then see all of the different paths that I have in there. Let's go ahead and do a view and change it back to the GPU. And there I've got my horses as a recolored trace image. So I'm going to go ahead and save that one, and you need to go ahead and do one more on your own. And we're going to do one final one with the image trace. We're going to go ahead and play with the illustrated poster look, so kind of a vintage travel poster look. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Art Deco for trace, and you can see if we scroll in, we've got kind of a statue, very Art Deco, very a lot of really clean lines. Let's go ahead and do a file save as. Change it to a first initial last name, underscore, what have you call it? Poster trace. And let's save it as an Illustrator file in my folder here. Oh, and say save. And OK. Now I'm going to do my object, fit artboard bounds. I'm going to go ahead and grab my tools and select that and come over here to my properties, my image trace. My image trace this time I want to take it to 6 colors. And it's going to take a little bit, so I could reduce it, and well, let's go ahead and try that. Let's do object and rasterize, see how much faster it goes. Object, rasterize, and tell it OK. All right, now let's go to our image trace and come down here to our 6 colors and say OK. So what I'm telling it to choose just 6 colors. So there's a few different options. You've got a 3 color, there's 16, and there's 6. You can do, I think, up to 30 colors when you're doing a trace. All right, if you did want to recolor it, this is where you could go in and grab your swatches, your swatch library, add another swatch to this. For this one, I'm not going to recolor it, so it's not too bad. I've got some, it's not terrible. I've lost a little bit of detail, so I'm going to go ahead into my library and with my image trace here, and let's go ahead and adjust a few things. I'm going to take that paths. So right now, this has got like a lot of detail. Maybe I want to take some of that detail out, so I'm going to go ahead and take that paths down to 10. So I'm going to lose some of this detail in here because I really just want kind of those clean lines. There are a few things showing up here that I don't love. I would probably want to go through and take out those little bumps, those little brown dots later. So now it's cleaning that up. So if I wanted to, I could make it even more clean looking. I could take those corners down to 10. And it's totally up to you as to what final look and feel you're really trying to go for. I'm going to take even more of that noise out by taking this down to 10 pixels. Then I'll do one more after this. We'll go ahead and check this snap curves to lines. I wish you could do them all at once and then have it start doing it, but I haven't figured out how to do that. All right, we're getting close. Let's do that, snap curves to lines. Still got quite a bit of detail in here. I like that. I like how nice and clean these lines are. So when you're doing this, a lot of it has to do with what type of images do you start with. So you see this look a lot when you're looking at like vintage travel posters. Kind of the Hope poster does part of this. So I'm much happier with it. Let's go ahead and close it. Come over here and expand. Then I can go ahead and do my ungroup. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those couple little dark dots that are driving me a little crazy because I'm weird that way. All right, so when you're happy with it, you can go ahead and, or I guess I could have recolored those, now they're white. They're not terrible. All right, so that's how you go ahead and play with some of those different image trace functions in the Adobe Illustrator. I hope you have fun creating some new and different types of pieces and creating those neat vectors out of different types of raster art. And for the tutorial, you definitely need to do it on your own for each different sample. That's all for this one.